Okay, so let's just dive right in. We're starting this deep dive, not with a nice, neat introduction, but with a horrifying final scene.
A really horrifying one. Imagine Baghdad, March 26th, 922.
And a man, al-Husayn ibn Mansur al-Hallaj, is led out for a public execution.
And the state's verdict demanded, it was absolute obliteration.
Right, he was beheaded, his body was burned.
And the ashes were scattered into the swift current of the Tigris River. It was a conscious act of political terror.
Meant to completely erase him from memory.
Exactly. But, as often happens with martyrs, the sheer spectacle of his death it ensured his immortality.
And there's that incredible legend.
The legend, yeah, that says, as his ashes floated downriver, they could still be heard chanting one defiant phrase, al-Haqq.
I am the truth.
I am the truth.
And that phrase, al-Haqq, that's really the flashpoint for this entire deep dive, isn't it?
Mm.
Hallaj is one of the most famous, most controversial mystics in Islamic history.
Absolutely.
So our mission today is to try and figure out the real cause of that martyrdom. Was it purely religious? Did he die because he was a reckless heretic saying blasphemous things?
Or was his end the result of a coordinated political conspiracy, something hatched in the chaotic world of the Abbasid palace?
To answer that, I guess we have to start at the beginning, his roots.
Right. So Hallaj was born around 857 in Iran from a Persian family. Fun fact, his grandfather was actually a Zoroastrian convert.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but Hallaj himself was thoroughly immersed in the Islamic world, grew up completely Arabized, spoke only Arabic, and got a really rigorous education in Wasit.
And that education focused on the inner aspects of the Quran.
Intensely. Which led him, directly into the orbit of early Sufism. This was a deeply intellectual and spiritual movement at the time.
And he started young.
Very young. At age 18, he was already training in Basra under Sahal Tustari. But he didn't stop there. He moved on, got initiated into the Baghdad school of Sufism by Amir al-Makki.
Which connected him to the titans of the movement, like Junaid.
Exactly. He was basically sampling the best of what the early Sufi world had to offer, connecting with multiple major lineages.
But the key here is that he didn't stick with any of them.
No. That's what defines Hallaj's early journey. His eventual total break from these traditional schools, he became fiercely independent.
Was this break just intellectual, or did something happen?
Oh, it accelerated dramatically. It happened during his first Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in 883. He stayed there for a full year.
A whole year.
An entire year, yeah. Just engaging in these intense spiritual practices, fasting, meditating, even staying physically attached to the Kaaba. This was his great mystical breakthrough.
And he believed he'd reached the highest station. A complete union with God.
Yes, and he didn't just feel it, he wrote about it. That's the key distinction. He poetically described this radical intimacy, saying, "No part remains between my heart and guts without me knowing him by it and him knowing me."
It's an assertion of absolute seamless union.
And this is the moment. This is where he transitions from a devoted disciple to the infamous intoxicated mystic. He goes back to Baghdad, and he doesn't keep this experience hidden.
As was the norm, right?
Completely against the norm. He went public, preaching openly about mystical union and, maybe more dangerously, using that spiritual authority to condemn the moral corruption he saw.
Okay, so if the idea of fana, this self-annihilation and union, was already part of Sufism, why were his masters like Junaid so quick to condemn him?
It was almost entirely the context, not the content. The concept of union was common, but proclaiming those esoteric secrets, the asrar, to the uninitiated masses was the cardinal sin.
Why? What were they afraid of?
Junaid, who represented what we call sober Sufism, feared the common people would just misunderstand it. They'd interpret his words literally as a claim of hulul.
Incarnationism. Blasphemy.
Exactly. The idea that God had literally become incarnate in him.
So Hallaj becomes the poster child for intoxicated Sufism.
The prime example, yeah, alongside figures like Abu Yazid al-Bistami. But this public preaching, it gave him influence.
Immense influence, it seems.
Absolutely. By his second pilgrimage in 894, he wasn't alone. He had 400 disciples with him. He was no longer a student. He was a powerful, independent spiritual figure with a huge public following.
So let's get to the theological heart of it all. That ecstatic utterance, al-Haqq, I am the truth. On the surface, it sounds like he's claiming to be God. We have to clarify what he actually meant.
We absolutely do. Hallaj's entire spiritual life was focused on fana, on annihilation. It's a process where you strip away everything personal, your traits, your identity, until the self is just extinguished.
And al-Haqq was the cry that erupted from that vacuum.
It's called a shath, an ecstatic utterance. And historically, statements made in that state were typically excused under Islamic law.
Because the person wasn't considered legally sober or accountable.
Right.
So we can pretty much dismiss the idea that the statement itself is why he was killed.
Yes, that's a crucial point. The real meaning of al-Haqq was the ultimate self-negation. When the mystic is annihilated, Hallaj taught that nothing is experienced but the reality of God.
So he wasn't proclaiming the divinity of al-Husayn. He was proclaiming the absence of al-Husayn.
Precisely. And to underscore that, he vehemently rejected hulu, incarnationism. He fought hard against that interpretation. He saw it as asserting a duality, a partnership with God.
And that would negate the unity of God, Tawhid.
Exactly. He even challenged his critics. He said, "Is it you or I that will be two gods in me? Take away this I am from in between." The whole point was removing the ego, the I am.
Okay, so if his theology was so clear on that, why did his poetry consistently sound so provocative? Lines like, "We are two spirits dwelling in a single body." That sounds a lot like incarnation.
It does, and that's the danger. He was trying to articulate an experience that transcends language.
Yeah.
The experience of Fana is one of total unity, and only the language of, say, physical love or intense paradox can even come close to capturing it.
He used that image of the moth and the flame, right?
Yes, in his book Kitab al-Tawasin, the moth can only achieve true knowledge by completely rejoining, by burning up in the flame.
So the danger was that the masses, who heard the poetry without the training, only heard the duality, not the surrender.
That's it. And we should reiterate, despite the radical language, Hallaj was deeply rooted in the Quran. The scholar Louis Massignon confirmed that every facet of his thought came from it. It's also fascinating that he may have even aligned with the Hanbali school of law.
The strictest, most literalist school.
Exactly. That tension-strict law and boundary-smashing mysticism is what made him so volatile. And it signals his radicalism wasn't just theological, it was political.
Right, which leads us to where his political danger really starts to crystallize. He was a prolific writer, we know that. 46 books listed, but tragically almost all are lost.
Yes, and in the dense mystical work that did survive, Kitab al-Tawasin, we find another piece of radical theology that shows his uncompromising nature. His take on Iblis.
On Satan. This is a truly shocking concept. How did he portray him?
He portrayed Iblis as the ultimate monotheist, the Moa. Hallaj's argument was that when God commanded the angels to prostrate before Adam, Iblis refused.
Not out of malice.
No, but because he would never prostrate before anyone but God. For Hallaj, Iblis affirmed God's absolute unity, the Tawhid, more perfectly than any other angel.
That is an incredibly provocative twist. So how did he explain Satan's punishment, his fall?
He argued Iblis still had a flaw, arrogance. He said, "I am worth more than he." Hallaj is clear that this arrogance led to his fall, but, and this is the key, that arrogance derived from his singular devotion.
So he becomes his tragic hero.
A tragic hero, exactly. Closer to God in devotion than anyone, but his one point of pride led to damnation. And later, Sufi martyrs really identified with that.
You can see how this uncompromising mindset would translate into his politics. His sermons in Baghdad, they weren't just spiritual talks, were they?
Not at all. They were direct attacks on the system. He wasn't just talking about personal piety, he was condemning the visible corruption, the societal inequity of the Abbasid capital.
He was challenging their moral authority.
Directly asking the rulers, how long do you contest the one who sees you in a sea of errors? This was a clear call for moral reform, and it gained massive traction.
So he started a movement that was seen as a direct threat to the regime's power.
A tangible threat. The Abbasid Caliphate was already facing huge external threats. A charismatic figure undermining them from within was just intolerable.
And he had supporters high up, too.
Yes, including two powerful viziers, which shows his influence had reached the very top. And when a street preacher has the ear of the masses and the ruling elite, the political machine gets very, very nervous.
And that brings us to the tipping point. The palace intrigue. The climate shifted dramatically after a failed coup in 908.
Exactly. Hallaj suddenly found himself on the losing side of this palace intrigue. Power is fluid, especially in that court.
And a new vizier was appointed, Furat, who hated him.
Intensely disliked him. His protection vanished. Hallaj fled, but was eventually caught and spent over a decade imprisoned in the caliph's palace, just waiting.
The official charges against him were a masterclass in political maneuvering. They were just smokescreens.
Total smokescreens. First, the charge of teaching hulu, incarnationism, which we know he rejected.
And then the second, more potent charge, that he was a sympathizer for the Karmatians.
A violent Ismaili group. And you have to understand, the Karmatians weren't just local troublemakers. They were a massive, hostile force that would eventually sack Mecca.
So associating Hallaj with them was political poison.
Immediate poison. He was publicly branded a missionary of the Karmatis, despite having no real connection to them.
So the state needed a charge that was legally undeniable to justify killing him, but one that served their political goal of painting him as a traitor. What was the specific statement that finally sealed his fate?
It was an al-Haqq. It was a comment about ritual practice, something they could use to prove his Karmatian alignment. He had said one should circumambulate the Kaaba of the heart 7 times.
The Kaaba of the heart. I mean, that's a pretty common Sufi metaphor that the real pilgrimage is internal.
Of course. But the state took this, along with a rumor that he'd built a makeshift Kaaba in his backyard, as an actionable, literal rejection of the physical Hajj.
And since the Karmatians were actively threatening Mecca and the Hajj,
They had the legal cover they needed. The execution was decreed. Not for the ambiguous language of ecstasy, but for the practical, ritualistic crime of undermining a state-sanctioned institution.
and the execution, as we began, was barbaric, a calculated message. And it wasn't just for him. His friend, the Hanbali scholar Ibn Atta, organized a demonstration in his defense.
He was beaten to death for it. Hallaj's story is just the definitive example that in the 10th century, separating religion and politics was impossible.
It was a political execution, carried out through the mechanism of religious law.
Absolutely.
His legacy, though, is undeniable. Along with Aina Qadat and Suhrawardi, he's one of the 3 great martyrs of Islamic mysticism. His intoxicated style inspired masters like Attar and Rumi.
Though he stayed controversial, even the great Ibn Arabi praised him as a saint, but agreed that his public revelation of secrets, that uncompromising refusal to keep his daring experiences to himself, warranted condemnation,
That refusal is what gave him the halo of martyrdom.
and transformed him from a political casualty into a spiritual icon.
So here is the paradox we want to leave you with. Hallaj was legally condemned and executed for advocating the spiritual circumambulation of the Kaaba of the heart, a ritualistic error used to frame him as a political traitor.
Yet, his fame, his enduring power, rests entirely on the ecstatic proclamation the courts ignored, al-Haqq.
If the Abbasid state really wanted to silence the radical spiritual threat, why focus on the relatively minor ritual crime instead of the powerful proclamation that ultimately defined his legend?
It suggests that political power perceives its greatest, most tangible threat, not in the high-flown, ambiguous language of mystical union, but in the specific, actionable rejection of the established public rituals that uphold the state's authority.
It really forces you to ask where the real battleground between spirit and power always resides. In the realm of experience or in the realm of prescribed action?